Hello and welcome to Mahatma Gandhi Letters. Dear listeners, through all these events we have traveled almost for about a year with Gandhi in South Africa. If the movement in South Africa, until the establishment of the Natal Indian Congress, is considered as one phase, then it is another phase thereafter. Before we move on to the next phase of establishment of the Congress, it is appropriate to recapitulate a couple of key events that have taken place so far. For the first event, we have to go back to his early days of South Africa. In his autobiography, Story of My Experiments with Truth, Gandhi describes his first-hand experience of persecution in South Africa. On the second or third day of my arrival, he took me to see the Durban court. There he introduced me to several people and seated me next to his attorney. The magistrate kept staring at me and finally asked me to take off my turban. This I refused to do and left the court. So here too there was fighting in store for me. Abdullah Sheth explained to me why some Indians were required to take off their turbans. Those wearing the Musalman costume might, he said, keep their turbans on, but the other Indians on entering a court had to take theirs off as a rule. I must enter into some details to make this nice distinction intelligible. In the course of these 2 or 3 days, I could see that the Indians were divided into different groups. One was that of Musalman merchants, who would call themselves Arabs. Another was that of Hindu, and yet another of Parsi clerks. The Hindu clerks were neither here nor there, unless they cast in their lot with the Arabs. The Parsi clerks would call themselves Persians. These 3 classes had some social relations with one another. But by far, the largest class was that composed of Tamil, Telugu, and North Indian indentured and freed laborers. The indentured laborers were those who went to Natal on an agreement to serve for 5 years and came to be known there as Girmitiyas from Girmit, which was the corrupt form of the English word agreement. The other 3 classes had none but business relations with this class. Englishmen called them coolies. And as the majority of Indians belonged to the laboring class, all Indians were called coolies, or Samis. Sami is a Tamil suffix occurring after many Tamil names, and it is nothing else than the Sanskrit Swami, meaning a master. Whenever, therefore, an Indian resented being addressed as a Sami and had enough within him, he would try to return the compliment in this wise: "You may call me Sami, but you forget that Sami means a master. I am not your master." Some Englishmen would wince at this, while others would get angry, swear at the Indian, and, if there was a chance, would even belabor him. For Sami to him was nothing better than a term of contempt. To interpret it to mean a master amounted to an insult. I was hence known as a coolie barrister. The merchants were known as coolie merchants. The original meaning of the word coolie was thus forgotten, and it became a common appellation for all Indians. The Musalman merchant would resent this and say, "I am not a coolie, I am an Arab," or "I am a merchant," and the Englishman, if courteous, would apologize to him. The question of wearing the turban had a great importance in this state of things. Being obliged to take off one's Indian turban would be pocketing an insult. So I thought I had better bid goodbye to the Indian turban and begin wearing an English hat, which would save me from the insult and the unpleasant controversy. But Abdullah Sheth disapproved of the idea. He said, "If you do anything of the kind, it will have a very bad effect. You will compromise those insisting on wearing Indian turbans. And an Indian turban sits well on your head. If you wear an English hat, you will pass for a waiter." There was practical wisdom, patriotism, and a little bit of narrowness in this advice. The wisdom was apparent, and he would not have insisted on the Indian turban except out of patriotism. The slighting reference to the waiter betrayed a kind of narrowness. Amongst the indentured Indians there were 3 classes: Hindus, Musalmans, and Christians. The last were the children of indentured Indians who became converts to Christianity. Even in 1893 their number was large. They wore the English costume, and the majority of them earned their living by service as waiters in hotels. Abdullah Sheth's criticism of the English hat was with reference to this class. It was considered degrading to serve as a waiter in a hotel. The belief persists even today among many. On the whole, I liked Abdullah's advice. I wrote to the press about the incident and defended the wearing of my turban in the court. The question was very much discussed in the papers, which described me as an unwelcome visitor. Thus, the incident gave me an unexpected advertisement in South Africa within a few days of my arrival there. Some supported me, while others severely criticized my temerity. My turban stayed with me practically until the end of my stay in South Africa. When and why I left off wearing any headdress at all in South Africa, we shall see later. Dear listeners, coming to the second incident. As we all know, the Maritzburg incident in Gandhi's life has been revisited many times in Indian history. In this series, we also have read excerpts from the book Gandhi Kathana by D.S. Nagabhushan. Also, it would be curious to know how this incident is narrated in other prominent books about Gandhiji. Two of them are Satyagraha in South Africa and Story of My Experiments with Truth, written by Gandhi himself. Another article is from the book Life of Mahatma by Louis Fisher. As Gandhi says about this incident in his book Satyagraha in South Africa, I was pushed out of the train by a police constable at Maritzburg, and the train having left, I was sitting in the waiting room, shivering in the bitter cold. I did not know where my luggage was, nor did I dare to inquire anybody, lest I might be insulted and assaulted once again. Sleep was out of the question. Doubt took possession of my mind. Late at night, I came to the conclusion that to run back to India would be cowardly. I must accomplish what I had undertaken. I must reach Pretoria without minding insults and even assaults. Pretoria was my goal. The case being fought out there, I made up my mind to take some steps, if that was possible, side by side with my work. This resolution somewhat pacified and strengthened me, but I did not get any sleep. Dear listeners, similarly, Gandhiji recalls the same incident in his autobiography, The Story of My Experiments with Truth. He took me by the hand and pushed me out. My luggage was also taken out. I refused to go to the other compartment, and the train steamed away. I went and sat in the waiting room, keeping my handbag with me and leaving the other luggage where it was. The railway authorities had taken charge of it. It was winter, and winter in the higher regions of South Africa is severely cold. Maritzburg being at a high altitude, the cold was extremely bitter. My overcoat was in my luggage, but I did not dare to ask for it lest I should be insulted again. So I sat and shivered. There was no light in the room. Passenger came in at about midnight and possibly wanted to talk to me. But I was in no mood to talk. I began to think of my duty. Should I fight for my rights or go back to India? Or should I go on to Pretoria without minding the insults and return to India after finishing the case? It would be cowardice to run back to India without fulfilling my obligation. The hardship to which I was subjected was superficial, only a symptom of the deep disease of color prejudice. I should try, if possible, to root out the disease and suffer hardships in the process. Redress for wrongs I should seek only to the extent that would be necessary for the removal of the color prejudice. So I decided to take the next available train to Pretoria. Dear listeners, likewise, Gandhi's biographer, Louis Fisher, in his book, Life of Mahatma Gandhi, narrate this incident. Gandhi could have returned to the train and found a place in the third-class car, but he chose to remain in the station waiting room. It was cold in the mountains. His overcoat was in his luggage, which the railway people were holding. Afraid to be insulted again, he did not ask for it. All night long, he sat and shivered and brooded. Should he return to India? This episode reflected a much larger situation. Should he address himself to it, or merely seek redress of his personal grievance, finish the case, and go home to India? He had encountered the dread disease of color prejudice. It was his duty to combat it. To flee, leaving his countrymen in their predicament, would be cowardice. The frail lawyer began to see himself in the role of a David, assailing the Goliath of racial discrimination. Many years later in India, Dr. John R. Mott, a Christian missionary, asked Gandhi, "What have been the most creative experiences in your life?" In reply, Gandhi told the story of the night in the Maritzburg station. Thus, after decades, Gandhi remembers this incident and exclaims, "I was born in India and made in South Africa." Dear friends, today, after more than a century, Pietermaritzburg Station remains a pilgrimage site for Indians who view Gandhi's time in South Africa as a turning point for Indians, both at home and abroad. A plaque on the platform marks the approximate spot where he was pushed from the train carriage with his luggage. This incident changed the course of his life. It reads, "Gandhi's displays of passive resistance significantly influenced the path Martin Luther King Jr. and Nelson Mandela. The values of tolerance, mutual respect, and unity for which he stood and acted had a profound influence on our liberation movement and on my own thinking," Mandela said, as he accepted the honor of the Freedom of Pietermaritzburg, which was also posthumously bestowed on Gandhi. They inspire us today in our efforts of reconciliation and nation-building. In June 2018, to commemorate the 125th anniversary of this incident, a statue of Gandhi stands at the entrance to the platform. Titled "Birth of Satyagraha," the double-sided statue, crafted at the Mahatma Gandhi Digital Museum in Hyderabad, India, features Gandhi as a young lawyer wearing a suit and tie on one side and an older, bespectacled Gandhi dressed in a traditional Indian dhoti on the other. The Indians and the Gandhians across the globe take visit to the train station and often leave in tears. Dear friends, thus the story started. There led to the establishment of the Natal Indian Congress. In the next episode, we will see how Natal Indian Congress was taken into form. Thank you for listening. This is Mahatma Gandhi Letters.